Hello, my name is Mage and welcome to Black and White Thinking. Welcome back. Long time no see. I had a baby. It's been a crazy year or so. I won't go into too much detail, at least not in this video, but if you're still about, I can only thank you from the bottom of my heart. What better topic to begin my journey back into theory and discourse with than the dreaded Comphet, or officially, compulsory heterosexuality. Let's revisit Comphet together, and let's discuss, very specifically, why I believe it is an unhelpful term when used the way that it is on the internet. I'm sure this video will be totally uncontroversial and received in good faith. If this video is helpful or interesting in any way, please give it a like and sub to the channel for more hot LGBT takes. Sarcasm and begging aside, let's get on with it. So yes, this video is going to be about Comphet, but it was not the video I began writing. I've planned a mini-series where I discuss different theories and concepts that I have commonly used in my essays and will use going forward. This video is going to be one of those, just a little summary, purely academic, about what compulsory heterosexuality is. And then I, naturally, got distracted and wrote a bunch of opinions instead. But before we get to the opinions, we have to talk about definitions. I know I have spoken about Comphet in the past, in at least 2 videos, my original Harley Quinn show retrospective and my Master Doc video, but I want to revisit the term. I mean, I've really been wanting to re-examine my Master Doc video for a while, and whilst we won't be doing that exactly here, there will definitely be some crossover. So, sorry to those of you who have heard some of this before. Feel free to skip ahead to the opinion piece that will come after I redefine Adrienne Rich's work and the bastardization of it online. In 1980, Adrienne Rich wrote and published the essay Compulsory Heterosexuality and Lesbian Continuum. And whilst it was perhaps not her most important work, in my opinion, it is most definitely one of her most famous, and has had an enduring legacy in queer theory and queer spaces generally. Side note, I would always recommend checking out Rich's poetry. I personally think it is wonderful. In its original form, defined by Rich in her essay, compulsory heterosexuality is essentially the idea that heterosexuality is ingrained in society, and specifically ingrained in women from a young age. Rich argues that heterosexuality is no more innate than other sexualities, but that it is considered the default setting in almost every society and is therefore compulsory. She frames this through a lens of lesbianism, meaning to Rich, the love any woman can have for other women. She does not use lesbian in her essay to define lesbian as it would necessarily be defined today, meaning the modern colloquial definition of lesbian, being a woman who is attracted only to other women. This is not to judge either definition by morality or worth, simply to define what is discussed in Rich's essay. Rich argues that because of the nature of ingrained heterosexuality and the prioritization of men in women's lives, that women must be active in their choice to push back against heteronormativity. She notes that women do not often realise how centred their lives are on men, and heterosexuality by extension, and that this can harm women who are unable to protect each other and themselves socially. Although Rich's essay has its place in queer theory, and is queer theory, it is firstly a feminist piece, and discusses the plight of all women, not just those that are queer. The concept of compulsory heterosexuality can be a helpful one, when used correctly, and when used to envelop rather than exclude. All people, but especially women, feel its restraints, and it influences how we live our lives and how we create new structures in society going forward. However, in the last few years, especially in online spaces where queer women hang out, the term has been adapted, and as I said earlier, and will stand by, bastardized. For a start, the phrase is often shortened to Comphet, which one search on Google or Twitter will show you is used a lot to describe things that are not actually inherently compulsory heterosexuality. The term was specifically popularised after its usage in the godforsaken lesbian Master Doc, a Google doc written by an, at the time, teenager who wrote about her confusion around her own sexuality and published it on Tumblr. The girl who wrote the Master Doc no longer defines herself as a lesbian, she defines herself as bisexual. However, for many zillennial sapphics online, the Master Doc became a bastion of knowledge instead of being seen for the self-exploration it was. The Master Doc was then weaponized as if it defined the terms on modern lesbianism online, and the term comphet was co-opted in an entirely new and, in my opinion, terrible way. Online, comphet no longer referred to Rich's essay definition of compulsory heterosexuality and its restraints on women and society. It began to refer to the idea that any woman who was questioning her sexuality must be a lesbian, meaning woman only attracted to women, and anyone who questioned their sexuality or even questioned the role of heteronormativity in their life were considered open season for recruitment to a specific internet group of people who defined themselves not by their attraction to women, but by their lack of attraction to men. This may sound fine, but it led and still leaves many bisexual women, asexual women, non-binary people, etc. open to pressure and even bullying to define their sexuality by the rules of the internet and not naturally to themselves. And I know this for true because after discussing years ago how much damage I thought the Master Doc had done to online conversations between sapphic women, I was bombarded with thousands of messages on Twitter, on Tumblr, on my YouTube page. I was told to end my own life and called every slur you could think of for suggesting to question the concept. For example, a repeated trend, of which I put plenty of evidence for in my original Master Dog video, was bisexual women discussing their relationships with men, usually within the framework of their own feminism, being bombarded with a teenager's Google Doc and being told if they were dissatisfied with any relationship they had with men, it was probably because they were never attracted to men in the first place, that they were actually lesbians. Again, meaning no attraction to men, and that they were simply lying to themselves. If anyone pushed back against this notion, pointing out that it was natural to question heteronormativity, regardless of attraction, they were told they were the ones invading spaces and talking over real queer people. Comphet was no longer about compulsory heterosexuality. It was about destroying the nuance required to discuss sexuality amongst people seen as less queer than their monosexual counterpart. And I hate that. It's been years and I still see comphet being used as a weapon against bi people online, against anyone with a sexuality that is not static or monosexual, against people with different gender expressions, and people who are on the ace spectrum. I talk about a lot of things through a bisexual lens because I am bisexual. It's what I know best. But it is not only bisexuals who have felt the harm of the new definition of comphet online, and I imagine offline too, although I can only assume. I have a baby and no friends, so I'm hardly hanging out at the local gay bar anymore or going to Pride. Comphet, by the definitions of the internet, and with the language used in Rich's original essay, does not always encourage queer theory and understanding through intersectionality and inclusion. Comphet, by the definitions of the internet, and inspired by the Master Doc, is the definition of exclusionary, and Rich kind of agrees. In 2004, Rich wrote a reflection on her original essay. And in this reflection she discussed how she was proud of her original work and was glad it had been so useful to people, but that she had not intended for it to be seen as the bastion of sexuality that it had become, and that through the years past, she had understood both the wonder of her work and the critiques levelled against it, how it had both helped many people whilst leaving others feeling isolated from a conversation she had intended to be an open one. Her intent was for queer people to come together, not for her work to promote separatism. As Rich puts it herself, I undertook compulsory heterosexuality at Signs' invitation to contribute to an issue on sexuality from any perspective I chose. I thought I was writing an exploratory piece, an essay in the literal sense of attempt, turning the picture, the presumption of female heterosexuality, around to view it from different angles, a hazarding of unasked questions. That it should be read as a manifesto or doctrine never occurred to me. When it began to be reprinted as a pamphlet by small lesbian feminist presses here and abroad, I was agreeably surprised when I began to hear it was being claimed by some separatist lesbians as an argument against heterosexual intercourse altogether. I began to feel acutely and disturbingly the distance between speculative intellectual searching and the need for absolutes in the politics of lesbian feminism. Rich makes it clear in her reflection that compulsory heterosexuality was not meant to be used as a sword, but as an opening into intellectual conversations about the way women live their lives based on societal pressure. Rich goes on to discuss how her essay did and can encourage division if not approached correctly, and with a mind open to allowing discussion, and again, inclusion. She mentions how defensive she would be of her original work, but that she also understands that it is not perfect, and that supposed observed splits in feminist movements leave said movements more vulnerable to outside discourse. That ultimately, her piece should bring us together, not keep us further apart. That we are all guilty of separation when it comes to pathologizing and categorizing our own queerness. And yes, that includes me. That we are allowed, of course, to discuss the nuances we all feel, that we are allowed to have separate issues, but that as a collective, that should not stop us from pursuing the greater goal of equality in our rights and in our discussions. Along with the elation, intellectual but also emotional, of that time when, as I recall, a defensiveness, and rather to label and condemn rather than seek engagement and possible synthesis of views and positions. There had never been a monolithic unitary women's movement, yet the spectre of splits often led to blank engagement or public accusations of divisiveness. In framing a lesbian continuum, I was trying, somewhat clumsily, to address the disconnect between heterosexually identified and lesbian feminists. Bisexual people, ace people, anyone queer but not a lesbian, are not heterosexually identified. And by Rich's original essay definitions, sapphic women and other queer people are more akin to the lesbian feminists she discusses. When she discusses the lesbian continuum, she is defining it as a continuum of women that have relationships with other women, not just sexual or romantic ones. It is not a literal continuum of only lesbians. While she does not use the phrase outright, Rich is talking about intersectionality in this reflection, and how it is important to take into consideration when discussing compulsory heterosexuality. She discusses ableism and racism and classism, and the effect disability and race and class can have when discussing compulsory heterosexuality, and how she received criticism for not being more explicit in her language discussing this in her original essay, and she believed those critiques to be valid. I personally believed she didn't necessarily think she had to, because she didn't think her work would have the impact it did. Much like the Master Doc, her essay was a collection of personal musings, and I do not believe she thought it would spread as far and wide as it did. But also because she was a white feminist intellectual, the daughter of a doctor, whose work in the 1970s was reflective of her own life experiences up to that time. Whilst Rich was proud of her work in compulsory heterosexuality and lesbian continuum, she was well aware that it was far from perfect, as no work is. There are moments of insight, the feminist identifying of institutional patriarchy was one of them, that can seem to draw confirmation from every direction, iron fillings pulled to a magnet. Such moments can be electrifying and dangerous. To perceive human relationships in a different pattern, to imagine new social possibility, is an extraordinary sensation, but precisely at that point, the self-critical function needs to come into play, where, as contributors to the issue on my essay have pointed out, history, context, supporting sources need to be scrutinised. Comphet is a useless term if the origins of its existence and the subsequent reflections of the term are not acknowledged. Compulsory heterosexuality is felt by all, and those of us that are queer should not use it as a tool to malign and abuse other queer people. There must be room for self-evaluation that does not rely on label policing and assigning group rankings to people who are just figuring out how they feel. Rich herself did not believe that there were moral failings on a personal level to having or having had heterosexual relationships. She had 3 children with her husband before living her life with her female partner. Compulsory heterosexuality is not something you do, it is something thrust upon us all, and we are all victims to its trappings. We should not be using it as a weapon to judge the worthiness of our fellow queer people. And sapphics, I'm talking about us. We should never be defined by our relationships to men, but rather for our love for women, and we should acknowledge how that connects us, rather than how heterosexuality can separate us. And I truly believe that is what Rich was trying to encourage with her original essay, and what she later confirmed in her reflections on her piece. For me personally, I think it is important to remind myself that my queer activism and my love for queer theory is not separate from my feminism, and that queer feminism is, and should always be, understood through the lens of intersectionality in order for any of us to make true progress. And I'm finishing the writing of this essay the week that America has elected a new old president in 2024. And the need for us to be aligned and caring and open to each other's experiences, for us to understand each other and to see that we have more in common than not, seems more relevant than ever. Wow, okay, we did it guys. I did it. I made a video. The quality of that video aside, I did it. And you, listening to this, you stuck around for it. I can't quite believe after all this time away that I have finally achieved this, that we have finally achieved this. Well done, us. Anyway, I hope this video was not just noise in the discourse machine, and that although it was an opinion piece, I hope it encourages reflection and discussion. Please check out both of Rich's essays. I have linked them below. And just check out her work generally. She was an important part of the second wave feminist movement, and her writing on queerness is a part of our tapestry. Revisiting the work of elders and being both critical and inspired is required, I believe. Thanks again for being here. Links below for how to reach me and how to support the channel, all that good stuff. See you all again soon.